Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your in-depth look at news from Taiwan and around the world. I'm Sally Jensen. There are many reasons why someone might have to leave their home and seek shelter in another country. This year has seen an increasing amount of global conflicts and natural disasters, forcing millions to search for safety abroad. And some are hoping to find it in Taiwan. But how does Taiwan respond to those seeking its help? To discuss this, we're joined today by Kristína Kironská, an assistant professor at Palacký University in the Czech Republic. She focuses on human rights issues relating to Myanmar, China, and Taiwan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, can we just talk a little bit about your background and what got you interested in Taiwan and specifically human rights issues in Taiwan?
So I first came to Taiwan as a student back in 2008, and later I came back to teach at the University of Taipei. And since then, I keep coming back either for teaching or for doing some research. Well, Taiwan is a very fascinating place, and also it has a very good track record when it comes to human rights, but there's still lots of issues. And some of the issues, for example, the one that we will be talking about today, have to do a lot with politics and in particular with cross-strait relations. So this way I can combine my background in political science, but then also human rights.
And let's, look a little bit about these cross-strait issues and some recent events. So recently we saw 3 Chinese dissidents arrive in Taoyuan Airport, Taiwan's main airport, and they were seeking asylum or refuge here in Taiwan, at least temporarily, before they could go to a third country. And this isn't the first instance of that. We're seeing a lot of Chinese exiles or dissidents arriving in Taiwan. So my question is, how many people are arriving in Taiwan? How many of them are from China?
We don't have exact numbers because since there's no asylum law, there's also no official statistics. So basically, whenever we find out about these cases, it would be from the media or from the civil society organizations, or then they have their sources in the government. And looking at who really comes to Taiwan, I would categorize it into 2 groups. So one group would be the Chinese dissidents, the Hong Kong protesters, Tibetans, and then also descendants of the ROC army in Myanmar. And we could group these people together as people that are somehow by the ROC constitution not regarded exactly as foreigners. And then we have the second group where these people would be refugees from Syria, maybe en route to Europe, for example, or then we would have LGBTI asylum seekers, people that have heard that Taiwan is a good place for LGBTI people, just not knowing that Taiwan doesn't have an asylum law. And maybe a last group that is connected to this issue could be children that are born to migrant workers in Taiwan, children that are not registered at their embassies here or the representative offices, if they stay unregistered and in Taiwan until they reach the age of 18. And again, they would benefit from having an asylum law and being able to claim refugee status in Taiwan.
So you've just talked about a diverse range of people who kind of could arrive in Taiwan seeking refuge. Could you tell what kind of conditions are they fleeing back home?
I would say the people flee for the same reasons like refugees in other countries. One group that we could talk about is Myanmar refugees, people that are fleeing from the violent situation back in their country, because there has been a coup attempt in 2021. So this would be a good example of people who maybe came to Taiwan to study or to work, but now are looking for avenues how to stay in Taiwan and not to have to go back to their country.
So if we can now zoom out on Taiwan's response to these refugees and asylum seekers, because of course there are so many different kinds of people arriving in Taiwan hoping to get some help. But what happens to a refugee when they arrive in Taiwan?
So first of all, they can't really go through the regular process. So they're dealt with on a case-by-case basis, which in itself is quite problematic. Usually they have to rely on the help of civil societies and NGOs that are helping these refugees.
So you've spoken about this case-by-case basis. People are dealt with differently. Can we talk about the kind of legal framework that Taiwan has at the moment to deal with these asylum seekers?
So it really depends a bit on the luck of the asylum seeker, who they find, which organization is going to help them, what kind of avenues those organizations have, and what kind of context in the government they have.
And why is there this lack of a structure, a formal legal structure to help these people who are looking for Taiwan's help? What is it about Taiwan? You know, other countries have systems in place. Why does Taiwan not have them?
This is a very good question, because Taiwan is really a place that works on its human rights and puts various things in place, but it doesn't have an asylum law. And here the connection is very much with the cross-strait relations, the Taiwan-China relationship, because specifically about refugees and asylum seekers in the society, there are these three concerns. One is a legal concern. For example, if a Chinese national arrived in Taiwan, how would this person be labeled as a refugee? According to the international law, a refugee is someone that has to cross the border. But we know that the ROC constitution does not really consider PRC or Chinese nationals foreigners. So this is the first problem. The second one is that many people are afraid that China would send over spies. But here personally, I think there's much better ways how to do the spying job than through a refugee. And the third concern in the Taiwanese society is that Taiwan would be flooded with refugees.
And does Taiwan not being part of the UN, does this play into all of that? I mean, you've said partly, you know, to do with the China relationship. Is it also because Taiwan isn't bound to UN conventions on refugees?
Yes, so Taiwan is basically on its own when it comes to putting some refugee system in place. Even though Taiwan is not a UN member, it has adopted 5 international covenants that are now part of Taiwan's domestic law. For example, the ICCPR and the ICSCR, which has the non-refoulement principle. This is a principle where if you receive asylum seekers from other countries, you're not supposed to send them back to a place where they could face persecution or any other dangerous situation. So Taiwan is actually bound by this non-refoulement principle. Because it has adopted those covenants into domestic law. And these covenants are reviewed every 5 years by international human rights lawyers. And every time they come to Taiwan for this review process, they find, or one of their recommendations is that Taiwan should adopt a refugee law specifically because of this non-refoulement principle.
How does Taiwan's public generally respond to people arriving on its shores?
Oh, so this is actually very interesting, because since we don't have numbers of the asylum seekers arriving in Taiwan, there's also not a lot of talk in the Taiwanese society about this issue. And this then means that there's also not many statistics or opinion polls about what people think. So I spoke earlier about those 3 concerns, but this is kind of hearsay. This is not based on any hard data. So me and my colleagues, we have actually conducted an opinion poll, a large-scale opinion poll, a representative one, and we asked specifically about questions related to a potential asylum law and also how people feel about receiving refugees.
So you've mentioned conducting some opinion polls. Can you tell us what the findings of these were?
So people actually tend to have a more positive rather than negative response to adopting an asylum law in Taiwan, although the majority of the people answered that they don't know. This kind of shows that there is a lack of discussion about this, and this is why many people have never thought about this. Also, whenever I talk about this issue to people in Taiwan, many of them are surprised that Taiwan doesn't have an asylum law. And some more findings show us that people feel quite favorably towards potential refugees. And we asked specifically about war refugees, such as Syrians. We asked about Hong Kong protesters. We asked about Rohingya refugees, and we also asked about Chinese dissidents. And with all these groups, people feel quite favorably towards them, maybe with the exception of the Chinese.
And are there other reasons that there might be kind of certain preferences between the distinctions of the different types of refugees that arrive? Because we see also in your research that Taiwanese people respond differently to different groups. Why is that?
So we wanted to test this with a mix of groups, a mix of ethnic, religious groups. So we asked about, for example, Muslims, about Africans, Europeans, people from Syria, people from Myanmar. And with all these groups, we still got a positive response. The only one that stood out were people from the PRC.
And is that due to these fears that you mentioned before of spying, or why are they so?
I think this goes back to the very complicated and very tense relationship between China and Taiwan. We went a little deeper and we asked about different groups of Chinese people. So we divided this question into politicians, dissidents, Chinese spouses, Chinese students, and Chinese tourists. And here we could nicely see that people felt the most negative towards politicians and the most positive towards Chinese students here in Taiwan.
What your research and your discussions with ordinary Taiwanese people have shown that, you know, people are quite surprised that there's no asylum law. There is a positive feeling towards refugees who arrive here. So what is the government, if anything, are they taking away from these findings and thinking of implementing something?
So the problem is that whenever there is a new draft law in the parliament, in the legislative yuan, and it's not picked up further for discussion and not passed as a law, with each term it gets thrown out and you have to restart the process every time. So since there have been elections now, we'll have to watch closer what happens now. So I know that the new draft law is already in preparation and should be sent to the legislative yuan in the coming months.
What kind of non-governmental recourses do they have access to?
In the case of the Hong Kong protesters that came to Taiwan, it was actually a coalition of NGOs that were helping, and some were providing financial assistance, some were helping find accommodation, some were helping with legal issues, some were providing psychological assistance. So they joined forces, and since there was a lack of response from the government, they were helping these people. Later on, there was a specific agency established by the government that was supposed to take over these tasks from these NGOs, but the NGOs are still closely involved in helping them.
Do you think the number of refugees arriving in Taiwan is going to increase, or how do you see these situations developing?
This is very difficult to predict, but in general, I think it's much better to have some mechanism in place. And then in case something happens, like we have seen the Russian aggression in Ukraine, which is very far from here, but then also much closer, the Myanmar coup and all kinds of other issues happening in the world, it's much better to be prepared. And once this happens, to know what to do and how to process these asylum seekers.
Thank you so much for your insight, Kristína. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can get more stories from TaiwanPlus by following us on social media. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.